This is the PR Podcast, a show about how public relations helps you tell your story to the world. We talk with great PR practitioners who have the skills, creativity, and just plain savvy to get their clients noticed. Now here's your host, Jody Fisher.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the PR Podcast. I'm Jody Fisher. Thanks for joining us. Well, have you got yourself a PR podcast plug yet? You know, at the top of every show, we plug our people's passion projects, the passion projects of PR people. See that alliteration? I did that last week too, and I loved it so much, I'm doing it again. Who write it and let us know what they're doing. We want to plug your passion projects. It's not your main gig. It's not the thing that brings you a paycheck. It's the thing you do on the side. So for me, it's the PR podcast, right? I love doing this. I love talking to guests, bringing these conversations to the people who are interested in them. So if you want a PR podcast plug for your passion project, send us a DM on Twitter at the PR Podcast. We'll follow you. You follow us, and we'll plug your passion project in an upcoming episode. We also want to make sure that you're sending us your guest pitches, either for yourself or maybe for someone you represent. If you think someone would be a great guest on our show, we have 52 guests a year, 52 weeks a year, 52 episodes a year. You should be one of them. So if you want to be featured as a guest on the PR Podcast, send us a DM on Twitter as well, and we'll dig right into that. Now, let's dig right into our guest. We got a great one this week. David Robbins is president and founder of DR PR Consulting in New York City, where he has worked with a wide range of clients across healthcare, sports, higher education, plus in-house PR roles at the Anti-Defamation League, Columbia University, and Northwell Health. He started his firm during the height of the pandemic in 2020. Wow, that's brave. And continues to leverage his reputation as a highly trusted communications advisor for C-suite level executives and subject matter experts across a number of industries. A lot of parallels to what I do as well. David, welcome to the PR Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
You and I, like I said, we work in the same geographic area of the country, right? We're both in the geographic New York market. And we have some overlapping subject matter areas. Tell us about how things are going for you and your business.
Well, as you mentioned at the top, I did start my consultancy after a career in the in-house side of PR, as well as some consulting roles as well. And, you know, I have to actually tip my hat to you. And in my journey to start my own PR consultancy, I came across your podcast and sort of really learned a lot from you and your guests as I'm, you know, beginning my journey in this new phase of PR world. So thank you for that.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I appreciate it. That's awesome. I'm glad I didn't mess you up.
No, only helped.
So you got off on the right foot. I mean, you got some clients in the door right away. How were things when you were launching?
It's a great sort of transition to be able to go from the in-house side to the consulting side, because you're able to understand what it takes from the in-house side and how that can translate well as a consultant, even though the dynamic is quite different. But all of the in-house roles that I have had under my belt, I think really primed me for understanding how on the ground, how executives think, how subject matter experts work by being able to be fluid in the office, you know, on top of colleagues, to be able to understand what makes them tick, what's the best way to amplify their voice. And it's something that you know, my sort of bread and butter is the thought leadership end of PR, where we take a subject matter expert, take an executive and amplify their voice, whether that's today helping them set up and research content for daily tweets, or understanding what a high level op-ed should look like and where it should be. And so there's a lot of room for understanding from the in-house side how you serve as an in-house PR staffer to how you bring that to the consultancy side.
Yeah, it's interesting working with I've also been in-house and on the agency side. I prefer agency. I'm a little bit of a cowboy. I like to sort of, make things happen, as opposed to, I find that there's a lot of process that goes on when you're on an in-house team. Not that process is bad, not knocking it. It's just not my personality, right? I'm someone who pushes the button and worries about it later. But in any case, it's helpful to have had that role and to listen to your experience, knowing what goes on in-house, how you can then understand where they're coming from when you're on the agency side, helping guide them towards that. And I love the phrase you use, that amplification of the voice that they want to get out there. Are there ways that you help those in-house teams or your in-house contact navigate that internal process to get what you need to then go pitch them out?
Well, I think it's really, taking the experiences from the in-house and understanding, well, you have that as a PR person, you have that open door policy to the executive director, to the dean, to the VP, to whatever subject matter expert you are working with on the in-house side, to be able to understand this is the best process, whether it's a proactive, talking about something proactive or talking about something that's a crisis. And then and then on the client consulting side, telling your client, I've been there on the in-house side. I understand what you're going through in the moment. Here's how I've weathered the storm before at X, Y, and Z place. And here's my recommendation of how to do it now with you, right? So I think clients like the fact that you've been sort of in their shoes, parallel to them in that context, to be able to say, this is not just some consultant with a briefcase who's flying in from Tampa into New York City. You've been there, you've done that, and that's why we need you in this moment.
Yeah, I like to use the phrase, I'm going to hold your hand and walk through this with you. As you said, to make sure that to let them know that you understand what they're going through, and to make sure that they've got a partner in you who is going to be there, understand what they're going through, but also gently, or maybe even sometimes not so gently, nudge them towards the direction they need to move in. Because I think in-house teams, the one thing that they can do is get paralyzed. We've got our process. We've got to talk to the VP, or we've got to talk to the CEO, and they're not available, or they can't do it, or they're worried. And you got to sort of nudge them towards the end product.
Right. And you're in that moment where you can say to an executive, to somebody in the senior leadership team, hey, why don't you think about this? Because it could yield you Y. Whereas a consultant who has not been on the in-house side may not be in a position to know what an internal process ideally looks like when, again, whether you're doing a proactive PR something or other, or whether there's a crisis at hand.
Yeah. So we were talking offline about the concept of thought leadership. And you work a lot with CEOs, a lot with the heads of organizations who want to get their perspective out there. And thought leadership, and I agree with you, you say is an overused buzzword. Everybody wants to be a thought leader. Well, what really goes into that? But it's still a very important tactic. Give us your perspective on thought leadership and sort of how you go about it with your clients.
So it's totally overused, and I'm not a big buzzword fan. But thought leadership is really important, because the press, we're talking about reporters and editors, they want to hear perspectives from subject matter experts. They sort of glean towards that. They navigate towards hearing from somebody who can really opine on a subject that they're reporting. And so thought leadership, while it is an overused buzzword in our communications world, it's really essentially, at the end of the day, showcasing the prowess of an expert. And that can mean so many different things. And it doesn't have to be formulaic in the sense that, it's just, they need to be in 10 stories a month, or they need to have 5 op-eds, this quarter. It's really understanding from them what their goals are and how we can lift up their voice consistently over time by understanding here are the top issues that they think about when they go to bed every night, or when they wake up in the morning coming into virtual world or now maybe into the office more, and then saying, here's a bucket, here's another bucket, right? This is op-eds, this is 3 tweets a week based on X trends that we think would make sense for you, right? This is proactive media outreach when you have some news to share. So it's traditional media relations, but it's really focusing on the individual subject matter expert to again, to showcase their prowess.
Almost feel like thought leadership and the way you're talking about it, and I really like the way you're describing it, it is almost relationship building and sort of profile building using the multiple platforms. It's not, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's not just writing and sending out an op-ed and hoping it lands in a column somewhere. It's the daily care and feeding of your profile, your public profile across social media, your website, direct emails to your consumers or your audience, right? Sort of sharing your perspective in an ongoing and continual way, so that then when you do have that significant op-ed moment and you actually put that pen to paper and write something down that you then send out, when those, I mean, you tell me if I've got the right approach here. What the opinion editor goes and Googles you and finds the Twitter feed and finds the LinkedIn posts and finds all that other stuff that makes them go, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, instead of them coming out of left field.
Right. And I really want to hone in on Twitter because, you know, I'm really, really a big fan of saying to a subject matter expert who doesn't have a Twitter presence now that it is part and parcel of your public facing image, your reputation. And that's a reality today because, as we all know, the press lives on Twitter. The press is not combing Facebook or searching Instagram for different things, unless there's something that bubbles up, of course. But Twitter is the home for press. And if we are able to take subject matter experts and build a following of key journalists to cover the core issues that organization or that company works on a daily basis or does advocacy on a daily basis, and we're doing things like quote tweeting and replying to their stories, or retweeting them, simply hitting like on something that is related to your organization in terms of the issues. If you find an article that a reporter has written, praise them. And then what happens is this sort of is as you mentioned, a relationship building process that happens over time, where much of what we do as PR people in this realm is seed planting. It's a long game. And I've had tons of examples where I've helped lift up Twitter profiles for individuals through this thought leadership approach, as we talked about, where I get an email 2 weeks later saying, I saw your tweet on X issue. Can your client, you know, I'm doing a story on this, would love to talk to him, and boom, that marriage happens. And so Twitter is so important. That's one of the first things I sort of look at when I'm evaluating what the value and the opportunities are for a specific individual.
Full agreement, full cosign on that. I can't agree with you more that Twitter is the one essential, I think. If you're doing thought leadership, you absolutely must, and not have just a corporate Twitter, but a personal Twitter for that thought leader. They've got to be on there doing exactly what you just described.
Right. And I think it's important to also mention with regards to Twitter is that you don't need to have 10,000 followers as soon as you open up, right? If you have 150 followers and 75 of them are reporters who are covering core issues that you care about, and 20 of them are organizational communal leaders or your counterparts who may retweet and share your posts. It's not about building mass, it's about building quality. And something I'm very, very passionate about talking about is the qualitative aspect of public relations is something that PR people need to emphasize way more than the quantitative. And I think you mentioned back a couple of months ago on an episode. I don't remember which one, but I think you mentioned something along the lines of, if you get a story in Patch, that could be, if you get a story in one story in New York Times, could not be as valuable as 5 Patch stories, let's say, for example. And so really it's the quality over the quantity here.
I appreciate you throwing that back at me. Yeah, I absolutely agree that you got to fish where your fish are, right? And you've got to get the publicity that is going to inspire some kind of action, right? Now, we always caution, and I'm sure you do too, PR is not a direct line to your cash register, but it should inspire some type of a reaction from the audience that sees it. The easiest example is, like the event publicity, right? Oh, there's an event coming up. Great. Somebody goes and buys a ticket to the event. Or here's a new product. Somebody goes out and buys the product. That's a very simplistic thing, but it could be engaging with the organization. It could be making an appointment to do something. It could be making a donation. It could be any kind of that, but just the engagement there. And then to your point with the thought leadership, I think it really goes a long way. Now let's pivot back to the conversations that you're having with your in-house teams that we talked about. How do you get a resistant in-house team to come around to wanting to engage on Twitter, as an example? Maybe they haven't before. Maybe they're scared of it. Maybe they go, oh, Twitter is, forget it. Don't go on Twitter. They're going to kill us or whatever. What's the conversation you have?
Well, it can be overwhelming. And also there's a lot, I'm finding there's a lot of doubt. I mean, should we really do this? It's time consuming. And it is a time consuming endeavor, because you want to make sure, especially in the beginning, when you're setting up a Twitter account for a thought leader, that you're coming up with not only understanding what the trends are that they care about, but also you're writing the actual content on their behalf, getting their approval. And then over time, you're understanding their voice incrementally. And then you're showing them examples along the way, or showing a potential client, or showing an in-house colleague examples of how this yielded. Like the example I gave just a minute ago about a journalist reached out 2 weeks later after they saw a tweet, because we followed them simply. We just hit the follow button, and they then said, who is this? Oh, and then they saw there's really deep, high level opining going on this Twitter account. And again, it's showing the examples of that value.
That's so great. That is so great. Yeah. So, all right. The one takeaway that we want everybody listening to this who's in PR, who does what we do, David, that we want to make sure that they get all of their clients some form of Twitter presence and start using it in just the way you described.
Exactly. To the T.
There you go. There you go. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about measurement, right?
Yep.
Because everybody's about ROI, and PR is historically a very challenging industry to measure, right? You can measure it with ad value. You can measure it with impressions. You can measure it in 6 million different ways. What is your measurement yardstick? How do you do it, and how do you manage it with the clients?
Well, I know you've talked a lot about this with guests, and seems to be a lot of differing perspectives on that yardstick. I'm a big, some may call this old school, but in 2022, everything is about data. Everything is about how we measure, and evidence-based approaches are really, really important. I don't want to undermine that at all. But it's really key. I think PR people should tone down a little bit on the over-promising and under-delivering. And I think it's really important to drive that home, because whether you're the director of PR for a nonprofit organization, or you're a consultant like us working with a client, there really needs to be an understanding that there's no guarantee for success. And that doesn't sound good from a business development standpoint, but it's really important that colleague, that executive, or that potential client understands that you are commissioning an expert who is a successful PR person. But at the end of the day, you can write the greatest statement, the best op-ed, have incredible media contacts. And at the end of the day, that campaign may not, or that specific asset may not have found a home. And that's okay. It sort of keeps our juices flowing, keeps us engaged and to try to find homes for things in PR. But the measurement aspect, there's such differing perspectives in the PR field that there's a lot of discourse on this. And as I mentioned before, I really think that it's understanding what the goals of the client, what are their goals, right? For publicity, right? I've had clients tell me, you know what, I'd like 3 op-eds a month. And I say to that client, I say, that is really predicated on your output as an organization. It's predicated on the news cycle, right? What's going on at the given moment? What are the trends? So on one month, we could have no op-eds, and the next month we could have 5, right? And have other clients who say, you know what, we need to be in probably like 30 to 40 stories every quarter. And I tell that client, well, maybe 3 stories in this quarter are better than 30, right? 3 news clips could be better than 30 conceptually. And so measuring success is constantly I call it a qualitative dance, right? You're having to explain things in prose and show the value in words and in demonstration, rather than saying, you know what, this article, your op-ed in the Daily News got 20 million impressions. Like, okay, you know, what does that really mean, right? Marketing has a much more definitive, and as PR people, we need to understand marketing very intricately. But in PR, it's not always so. It's success is in the eye of that individual, and you really need to sort of explain the value rather than in numbers, right? Because on one hand, you know, I had a client where I got, you know, let's say 50. If you have a client that says that they were in the news 50 times this year, it sounds great, right? But again, 10 could have been providing much more of a value for them than that 50 in the previous year. So it depends on what the overall picture is there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think you hit it on the head that the yardstick is different for every client, you know, and some clients may just need as much exposure as possible. We just want to be in everything, everywhere, all the time. And they have the street cred to get that, right? Because they already are either a known quantity, or they've got their neck deep in the subject matter, and you can actually pitch them and place them very frequently in that way. But sometimes when you're taking a client from zero, you know, they need to be happy with that 1 or 2 or 3. You know, I've had similar conversations with clients for 20 years, right? And you've got to sort of acclimate everybody and manage expectations and say, okay, look, you're starting out. We start here. We work our way up to that.
Right. And I would say
that's where we bring our value, is in the progression.
Right. And I would say to, you know, the consultant listening now, or the CEO who's thinking about hiring a firm, you know, take stock of the quality and appropriateness of the publicity that you received, rather than saying, what's the data sheet on the impressions, or, you know, meeting a certain benchmark for news is just, it's not formulaic in that way. And I really advise against that sort of thinking when it comes to PR.
100% agreed. Let's pivot a little bit again to talk about messaging and some nuance. You know, we as PR people, and I know you wanted to talk about this too, that we have to balance giving enough information with being brief enough to not completely lose a reporter in our pitch. Right. And especially in the age of email pitches, where there is no page 2 that you can go past. You know, I guess you're almost inclined to give more information, right? There's this school of thought that we should give them everything right out of the gate. Just give them all the information we possibly can. And here's links to photos, and here's links to videos, and here's the link to the Twitter feed, and just give them everything. And it's like the Bible. It's like giving them too much. You like to tread a middle road. Tell us about that.
I like to tread a middle road, but actually, and it really depends on, again, which individual and which client you're talking about, right? So, but generally speaking, I do sort of lean. My experiences, I've been really blessed to be privy to some really incredible subject matter experts and thought leaders, where the content is high level, it's deep, it's in depth, it extends more than just to a tweet, right? The email pitch about that specific expert is more than just a short paragraph, right? You need, I think, with specific clients or organizations or businesses that work at the crossroads of some really heavy issues, need to have the room to be able to show growth. They need to be able to show, you have room to show the value and the impact, right? So, for example, if you're pitching a reporter who is a health and science reporter, you want to make sure that you've got a chock full of links in there and previous studies that are explained, and not just keep it brief. And so it really it's a matter of understanding what that specific press person, that reporter, is looking for. And if you know that they are looking for something substantive, give them substance. Don't hold back and say, I have to keep this brief, because you want to be able to showcase the depth of the topic that you're trying to find a home for or trying to get publicity around.
Is it worthwhile in that initial pitch to give just enough, but still in a brief way, and then sign off with something like, I'd be happy to give you more information if you needed, or some sort of little hook there, right? To say, if I've got plenty more here, if you need it, let me know. And that sort of engages them.
Yeah, I think it needs to be teed up to that, right? You need to, if we're talking about, for example, a really heavy advocacy issue that has a lot of let's say history and depth to it, you want to be able to show for why it's important, and you can't really do that in such a short fashion. So you need room to flush that out. And it same goes with, we talk about pitching, we talk about op-eds. I do a lot of op-ed writing, and sometimes that 1,000 word op-ed or 1,200 word op-ed allows for that room, right? It allows for that specific issue that you're writing about to be able to have nuance and room to showcase it. That a 600 or 700 word piece may not do its justice. And so I know in today's day, I sound like I'm, back in the day, but it's important to not reflexly look at a long piece of content that actually may garner more engagement from your audience and say, oh, this is too long.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know that we could go forever on this topic, and I'd love to have you back to talk a little bit more about this in the future, David. We are going to segue, however, into the rapid fire question portion of our podcast. This is where we steal a page from inside the actor's studio and ask our guests a series of rapid fire questions meant to elicit a simple answer, maybe a laugh or two, hopefully a laugh or two. So with your indulgence, David, here we go. Rapid fire question. Number one, what is your favorite news source?
Can I turn the rapid fire questions on its head?
Go ahead.
All right. So we're talking about national news. I would say CNN broadcast. And for sitting down with the iPad, it's got to be New York Times. But I'm in New York City, so I'm a big fan of New York One and WNYC.
Excellent. Great answers. Great answers. Local answers. We love that. Rapid fire question number two, what is your favorite social media platform? I think we answered this already.
Well, from a PR standpoint, it's got to be Twitter. It has to be. That's the answer.
Yeah, you bet. I've always loved it because it reminds me of the AP Newswire. Just going back to my newsroom days, there was that printer over there in the corners just spewing out AP copy, and there it is.
Yep.
And it was all linear. I want Twitter to go back to linear. I like this. I don't want to see tweets from like 4 days ago. I can go find those if I need. Anyway, this is yours. This is your podcast, not mine. Rapid fire question number 3: coffee or alcohol?
100% coffee.
That's a New York answer. Very good. Rapid fire question number 4: what is your favorite on the run food?
I'll give you another New York answer. It has to be New York pizza. And if I'm not in New York, it may not be pizza. So I'm not sure.
You got it. You got a favorite in New York? You got a place, a go-to place?
Danny's Pizza in Kew Gardens, Queens on Lefferts Boulevard.
Nice. All right. I used to live in the neighborhood. Very good. Rapid fire question number 5: what do you want to be after you finish this career?
I'm really would love to be sort of a serial volunteer for different nonprofit organizations. So it could be like maybe it's a retirement thing where you're involved in a lay leadership format for any number of amazing advocacy groups, NGOs, nonprofits that you can lend your time and expertise to as well.
I love that answer. Yeah, got to give back. Got to give back. Well, David, this has been a great conversation. Please let people know how they can find you and your business online.
drprconsulting.com and David Robbins on LinkedIn with 2 B's and on Twitter at DRobb84.
All right. We'll click and follow everywhere. David, thank you very much for being here on the show. And we will definitely have you back. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Please remember to subscribe to the show, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The PR Podcast, and send us a question or a comment. Our intro is by Christopher Apple. You can find him and his fantastic photography on Instagram at Christopher_APPOLDT. Check him out there and hire him for all your photography needs. You can find me online at Jody Fisher on all the socials and on the web at jodyfisherpr.com. We'll see you next time on The PR Podcast.